All right, guys, welcome to Cinema Chads, episode 5. I am Chad. I'm here with my co-host Chad. You're looking very Chad-tastic today. I just wanted to
Thanks. Yeah,
say
I'm wearing Axe body spray, and I think that's kind of giving me a little bit of an extra Chad boost.
I'm drinking a Monster Energy drink at 9:50 p.m. Just trying to keep that,
A nightcap.
yeah. This is my 8th one today. A very hectic day, to say
Oh,
the least.
low numbers,
You gotta
rookie
get
numbers.
you gotta get those numbers up.
I had 8 for breakfast.
While you were lifting.
It's 8 reps of Monster.
You're doing a bench press. I'm above you. I'm pouring Monster in your mouth.
I have to say, I am really sick of this. I think it's classist hatred and discrimination against Monster, where it's seen as a redneck thing or a white. It's usually associated with like Fox Energy or Fox Racing. And that used to be the case, the fashion of Monster. I get it. I think they're big with Warped Tour. But at this point, I think it's a working class energy drink.
It's the Mountain Dew of energy drinks.
Yeah.
You know, it's for gaming. It's for like hanging with bros. It's for like right before you got to take on a couple bitches in the bedroom. You need 'em-
Coping with life sometimes.
Oh yeah, no, it's like coming home and having a beer.
There's been times I've gotten calls from my family like, hey, your grandfather's in the hospital. It doesn't look good. I'm like, I need a drink. I go to the fridge, get my Monster.
You know, if they put booze in it, like a Four Loko type thing,
Oh, it's too much. It's
I'd
too
go.
powerful.
I'd go to the gas station every night.
Yeah, I've mixed Red Bull with like whiskey and stuff. That's common, and that's great.
Yeah, vodka and Red Bull's really common.
Yeah.
Yeah, I never thought about that Monster with like booze.
I drank Monster right before I drank last time, but it wasn't mixed with it. It was just like I had a few Monsters and then I had a few beers.
Well, because the Monster would keep the energy up, and then the alcohol would mellow you out.
How I see it, Monsters, they're kind of like a misdemeanor. Alcohol's crimes.
That brings us
You
to our
can't have
movie.
crimes without misdemeanors.
That was like a verse. You can't have crimes without misdemeanors.
That's off Illmatic.
Oh,
I
that's right.
stole it,
Yeah, I think Fantano gave that a 6.
probably.
So yeah, we're gonna be talking about Woody Allen's uh crimes and misdemeanors. A Woody Allen joint. Could you imagine if that Q&A we went to, the Spike Lee one, if it had been Woody Allen, but it had been like
It would have been
exactly
great.
like it was, instead of a bunch of black people, it was a bunch of Jewish people. It'd be like, I feel really comfortable here.
And he only takes questions from like young college student girls.
Yeah, like 20-year-old Asian girls. Yes,
Some
please. That's my Woody Allen impression. It's just the
yeah, just doing this and then well
the
but
heart.
yes, so a black guy asked a really eloquent question and was like, next. Some little Asian girl asks a question. She's 4 years old. Woody's all about it. He invites her on stage.
He takes her home. You go to the bathroom later. He's like in the stall. You're trying to take a leak. You just hear him in the toilet.
Oh God.
The universe is meaningless. What are you doing? Why won't you come out? I don't.
Say it again. Say it again. I'm ready. I want to watch Igmar Bergman with you.
Why is it a handicapped person in the bathroom?
I guess my impersonation of a child is the same.
You just view them. It's the same.
Woody has a fetish for disabled people.
They did claim that. Remember in the book, Mia Farrow
Oh yeah,
said that
Sun Yi.
that she was like, I don't want to say the R word, but that's what she said, because he just says it in the book, I think.
Yeah.
Because I had
that would be.
I had the audio.
I shouldn't say it would be funny, but it would be really funny if she was.
That's the secret. He just has this mentally handicapped adopted girl, and he's like,
slave wife.
I'm gonna go to some baseball games.
Do you want another child? Want to have a child with me?
This is a great. You know what? Honestly, thematically, this ties into crimes and misdemeanors, right? Because I
Yeah.
think this is maybe out of movies I've seen. There's other ones. I don't know if I've seen another film that quite really dives into the concept of objective morality in the world and what human beings actually do, as opposed to our preconceived notions of what human beings are supposed to do. Like most movies will skim around those things or they'll find a positive character arc to follow. This movie,
Yeah.
virtue is not rewarded.
Vice.
Yeah, and negative choices, immoral choices are rewarded. And I don't think a lot of movies do that.
No. Usually how it is it has an implied moral objectivity of the director's or the screenwriter's vision, whichever. And then you're just expected to follow it, but it doesn't actually explore that, except for maybe a line where the villain says, "We're not so different, you and I." And what's funny about it is that when you do something fucked up, like when you do something just immoral, you realize immediately how easy it is.
Yes.
Like nobody tells you that in life. Like they make it seem like you're gonna live with guilt or you're gonna get caught by the police or whatever. But then you do something that you feel very guilty about, and you're like, oh wow, I did this thing that was bad, and I immediately got rewarded for it, and nothing bad ever happened. And that's usually how life is.
Well, that's what's messed up about this movie is and you're more of a religious man than I am, but the the conceit of this movie is essentially that in a world without God, anything you do doesn't matter. There is no good and bad. And he also says that let's say that the world's viewed through that way, like even if there is a God,
Mhm.
most people don't behave under that notion. They don't live under that fear. They might say they do, but generally in your life I think you're too distracted. In this film, at the end concept here is like it it feels real. This feels true to life. This is like I wish it wasn't. That's
Yeah.
what's painful about this movie. That's also what's funny about this movie and its clarity and Woody Allen's message, which he tries to convey in his other movies, but I think this one it's the most clear that a lot of life is just like luck. A lot of life is class, where you're at in life and power structures, and
That is what I wanted to bring up.
you're not going to win.
Is there's a real I never realized it until watching it for this episode. There's a real class parallel in the movie between Woody's character Cliff and I forget the other character, which I
Martin
forget his name,
Landau.
but Martin Landau, the
Yeah.
doctor, and how the doctor, the rich man, gets away with everything, but then the failing filmmaker, the working class type artist, idealist, gets away with not even doing anything. He's still punished for having temptation.
Yeah. That's exact. Well, it's funny you bring that up. The first note I have here. Opening speech sets a stage for class and status. Then we transition to absolute tension with the letter. Is this one of men's biggest fears? Getting caught. Let's talk about the cross-cutting during the speech. So the opening sequence
Mm.
here is, and already this movie starts with Annie Hall kind of complex editing that he doesn't
Yeah.
do in a lot of his. Hannah and her sister says a little bit of it too. But there's a cross-cutting here as Martin Landau's about to give a speech, and then we're like showing sort of flashbacks or even flash forwards. I can't quite remember. I watched this last week.
Speech. Like showing when they get home from the speech.
That's right. It's a flash forward, which is actually pretty ambitious for like 1989 when this came out. It feels very modern.
Sure.
And he gets a letter, and legitimately, this is one of the most horrifying things I think could happen to a man. Is
Yeah.
receiving a letter from your side hoe, especially if you have money and status.
Well, that's so much of the movie is the male ego of he's not racked with guilt because he was cheating on his wife. He's afraid that his reputation will be ruined and his place in this high class society may be threatened if his family finds out and their idea of him as a man.
Yeah, it's more about Yeah, that's dead on. It's more about punishment that he's scared of than actually that he did something wrong. He
Yeah, and
doesn't
even
actually
more
feel
so than
guilty, I'd say. I don't think he acts very guilty. He might say that he is, but
yeah, and even, like, when he wants to kill her, it's so he doesn't get found out. It's not that he wants to end things and that's it. It's
mhm.
because she threatens his public image. That's the thing that he'll kill to protect.
Well, I think the fact that the party that starts as this like bougie, it's the elite. I mean, it's basically an eyes wide shut event, you
Uh,
know, and he has to go up and give this big speech. He's getting like this award or something, or
Speaking of Eyes Wide Shut, he mentions the eyes of God are always watching.
hmm
And that's the interesting message of the movie where it gets, I think, a little bit. I do think it's a nihilist movie. I do think it's an atheist movie, but I do think that there's some, what's the word? Uh, Agnosticism in it, where it's almost saying, and through the lens of film too, which is fascinating, that even though people may not know what Martin Landau's done, the eyes of God see him. And he can't escape that feeling of being watched,
well, he's
which is
also
funny because the camera and director is following him.
and
It
he's an
becomes a meta commentary.
and he's an eye doctor,
Yes.
and there's a rabbi character that's going blind,
Yeah.
which
A bit
might
on the nose.
which might be the most Woody's ever like pissed on God. It's the most atheist edgelord thing I think he's ever done in a
It is. It's
movie.
very Ricky Gervais.
He's like, I got Sam Watterson in this. He's a rabbi. He's a great moral man, and he's going blind, and all the bad people get what they want.
Well, that's what makes that character get such a pass for me, where it becomes very kind of beautiful in a weird way. Is that the rabbi's going blind, but he's a great person. He's not secretly a predator. He's not a piece of shit. He's not embezzling money. He's a moral man who believes in God and has a position in this institution. And the end scene is atheist edgelord as it is, has so much humanism where he's happy, though he's blind. He's dancing with his daughter, and he's probably the happiest person in the whole movie. It goes back to Annie Hall with the horrible and the miserable. He's got a horrible condition, but he's happy, whereas everybody else is miserable, but they're able-bodied.
Well, also the finals kind of monologue from the doctor that Woody's character Clifford's making a documentary about, talking about that life has no meaning, the universe has no meaning, but we create love and relationships to imply and give it meaning.
Yeah, and in the fantasy sequence in the home, which I have a personal story about, where he's envisioning his childhood, his family when he's a child, having discussion about religion. And one character says that they would go through the motions even and live the same way even if God wasn't real. And I believe it's an Anne, it doesn't really say, says, so you would choose God over truth. And the guy's like, yeah, I would. And I
That
think that boils into the theme of the movie as well.
I have that written down here. If necessary, I will always choose God over truth.
Yeah. And,
That
and
line stayed with me too.
it comes off very negative, but the more you think about it, the more complex it becomes with like even not just religion, but morality. Like if these morals get you nowhere in life, what value do they hold if there's no God?
Well, I've talked about this a lot with people through the years. I've said to, I mean, I don't want to say like I'm like totally atheist, but I'm 85%. Because I don't ever like to say
Mm.
agnosticism because I think everyone's I think it's kind of a stupid term. Like I don't know. Uh,
Yeah, I appreciate the honesty of it.
yeah, well, because it also contradicts it because it's really just a life philosophy you choose. You either choose to life thinking there's a God, you don't know if it is or not, but you have to choose your behavior and your choices based off it, or you choose to live your life thinking there isn't one, and that affects how you live your life.
Yeah.
But if you just say I don't know and you're somewhere in the middle, then it kind of doesn't make sense. It sort of cancels out.
Well,
But
that's kind of the cowardice of agnosticism, I think, is that because if you don't have any religious belief, and I get it when you're younger, but after a certain age, a man without religion can be a bad thing because it's like, okay, so you have no life philosophy, you have no morality system, you have no culture. What do you have? And I get if you just naturally don't believe in something, but even being an atheist, at least then you can have values.
yeah, totally. Well,
But
this
agnosticism's just kind of like too cool to care. It's high school shit.
it's fence setting.
Exactly. And as a centrist, I say centrists are the shittiest people. I hate them. And that's exactly what agnosticism is.
But I used to have this conversation with people a lot, and I still do, where we would talk about things, and I would say, morality, I think for the most part, isn't objective. And the counter argument, I always say that it is not objective. Sorry. Then people usually counter with me and say, well, what about murder? What about rape? And I'm like, yes, as a society, we agree that we shouldn't do those things to each other. But I don't think there's any like objective law because we did that to each other for years, up until recently, really, and
We
we
get into
still
like
do it.
war. So is it okay to rape and murder and pillage in war times?
Exactly, that's the question. And if people don't feel bad about what they do, does that mean that they're morally wrong? Like, this is the Clockwork Orange argument, right? Like,
Yeah.
the orange is organic and then clockwork's inside of it. Are we a mechanism? Is there a ghost in the machine? Do we have a soul? Does it mean something or does it not? So does somebody have value if they're charismatic, intelligent, but they have a behavior issue where they like to do bad things to others, as opposed to a useless person that lives a good life? Or is it just a veneer? Do people pretend to be good people? Do we play the best versions of ourselves in day-to-day life, but deep down, are we all just these same pieces of shit? Is there's that side of all of us. I think it's possible for everybody to do the bad things that they judge other people for, and that might be part of the judgment, is a sense of guilt inside of yourself towards bad behavior.
Well, is it also kind of putting bumpers for yourself, like in bowling, get the bumpers, where you're saying, "Oh, that's horrible, that's awful," but you're trying to convince yourself that you won't do the same thing that you're seeing as repugnant that other people do.
I also think in fear of it not being done to yourself,
Yeah.
it's like to defend yourself from the
I do
actions.
think some things. I remember when I was in like high school, I used to wonder like murder. They'd always say, "Oh, why do they say somebody's crazy if they murder someone else?" Because I think that people can't psychologically fathom the idea of a sane person doing something like this. And as I get older, I'm like, no, no, you're crazy. If you killed somebody, if you hurt somebody in any, if you intend to cause harm, or even if you don't care if you cause someone else harm, you've got mental issues. That's not right. It's not psychologically sound.
Yeah, I agree. I don't disagree. I think harming someone else, unless it's in a defense situation.
Right. And that's just, you can make a million contexts where it's gray morally. I mean, in my opinion, like a home invader situation, since we're both Chads, like, like if you break into my house, all bets are off.
I love the idea of like, you're benching or something and somebody's breaking out, like, bad move, fucker. You throw a plate
Throw
at
the
him.
waist at
Yeah.
him. His head explodes.
Crimes and Misdemeanors is on your TV. Is he lifting to Crimes and Misdemeanors? So, just a quick synopsis of the movie for maybe if someone's listening to this and they've never seen or heard of this movie, because I don't want to say it's obscure, but I don't think it's like it wasn't a blockbuster.
Woody's been kind of memory hold, the filmmaker, where he's like famous as a celebrity, but people act as though he didn't make like 20 classics.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he's just forgotten about for reasons we'll get into later, because I notice a lot of people don't even do Woody Allen reviews or talk about Woody Allen
I
movies
think they're
anymore.
afraid to.
Oh, I agree. That's one reason I wanted to do this, and I think this is the proper one to start with because of that.
Mhm.
Just because what I got from this rewatch that really bothered me psychologically was just,
The lack of black people,
well, that was one thing
lack of
for sure.
representation bothered you.
Yeah, yeah. I was like, where are all the black people in this? But no, I guess I never interpreted this way before because I haven't seen this in years, to be honest.
Yeah.
It was hard not to make a connection between the Woody Allen stuff. And I'm not talking about Dylan Farrow and all that stuff, the accusations about child molestation. I'm talking about his relationship with Sun Yi.
Do you think that people didn't interpret the movie this way because it was too Sun Yi?
You go to the Chinese restaurant, you're like, "Can I get Sun Yi with fried rice?"
That's what Woody ordered.
Yeah. Oh, he ordered all of our. Oh, now I'm just being racist. He ordered all of our Sun Yi today. Yes, I'll have my regular. Uh, but this movie essentially is about two characters. It follows two storylines. I would say the main storyline is the Martin Landau story, where it's a doctor who had an affair. The woman that he's had an affair with, his mistress, is now threatening to tell his wife. She's trying to get money out of him. It's a bad situation. There's just sequences where she's like, I'm going to come over right now. I'm going to call your wife. And he doesn't know what to do. And then the other storyline follows Woody Allen as Clifford, who is a failing artistic documentary filmmaker in a failing marriage. His wife's brother is a very successful, I guess, sitcom producer, is what's established.
Yeah, he's a comedian of some sort. I don't think it's ever really like you don't see him doing stand up or anything. He's like in office giving speeches and stuff. So he seems to be some kind of producer or something.
And he's very successful, and the Allen character
Yeah.
hates him. He thinks he's a schmuck. He thinks he's a hack. And then early on, it gets set up that out of a favor to the sister, he's going to hire Woody to do like a PBS documentary about him so he can get some money so Woody can fund this film that he's making about a psychiatrist. And during all of this, Mia Farrow's character comes in. She's a producer, and Woody sort of falls for her. So that feels like it's basically Anna and Her Sisters or Annie Hall. It's one of those Woody Allen type movies. I think this character, Cliff, is very attached to Alvy Singer and those personas.
Yeah.
And that's happening. We're getting a pretty basic Woody Allen movie. It's at a high level, but it's a Woody Allen movie. And then the other part of the movie is like he's doing a serious psychological thriller. And those two stories are
Yeah.
juxtaposed with each other throughout the movie.
Yeah, it's what's fascinating about the thriller part is that only maybe a fourth of the movie is a thriller, or I would say over half of the Martin Landau plot is about dealing with the psychological effects and the guilt of having committed murder or commissioned murder, really.
And then the movies start to, not the movies, I guess, but the storylines start to reflect each other.
Yeah.
Which Woody's attempted this before. I mean, one of the things that's really great about Woody Allen is that he can have 6 or 7 plot strands intertwining with each other. Hannah and Her Sisters is that way, where it's like a novel. Annie Hall's got
Yeah.
this documentarian scattershot sort of approach, but it's coherent despite that. Manhattan has sort of a subplot with Diane Keaton that is kind of connecting to Woody Allen's main story with dating a girl that's a bit younger. And so this movie, this is the first time I think he really did it this direct. I mean, it's like he took Interiors and put it with Hannah and Her Sisters and put those two movies together.
Well, I was gonna say three different parallels with those other films that I notice when I watch it. Is obvious to me this is a sequel to Hannah and Her Sisters. I think that they're paired together as a duology. I think you almost have to watch them together to fully appreciate each of them. I think they're complete companion pieces. But then I think Match Point obviously is somewhat of a remake of this movie, just focusing on the thriller aspect of it, leaning heavily into that and being a more modern kind of sexual thriller movie. But one that I think is much closer to Crimes and Misdemeanors that never gets brought up is I believe it's called Melinda and Melinda.
Mhm.
It's people are at dinner and they tell the same story, one of which is a comedy, one of which as a depressing movie. And that parallel between comedy and tragedy in one plot, I think this was the first time he really tried that to this severe of a degree, where it's not involving marriage problems or depression, it's actual murder, the meaning of life, nothinglessness.
Nothinglessness.
It's just nothingness. For some reason, my mind added lists in there.
Yeah. I like it. It's a new word.
Yeah,
This is a nothingless movie.
it's a Chad word. Nothingness isn't enough.
Well, we're both huge Woody Allen fans, which I know it's
Hmm.
like coming out as something now. Like you have to hide it. We have to.
Yeah. Well, there's this thing now where if you like someone's art, that means you agree with everything they've ever done, everything they've ever said. It's this it's purity culture. Is that what it's called? A purity test, where if you've done one thing wrong, you're out. And my counterpoint is okay, so if you like Alice in Wonderland, you shouldn't because Lewis Carroll was a pedophile. If you like the Beatles, Led Zeppelin, David Bowie, Roman Polanski, Steven Spielberg, allegedly, um, a lot of other people, then you have to accept that they did fucked up shit.
I like that you just threw in Spielberg. There's no evidence or any kind of accusations. You're like, listen, I read something on the internet.
Yeah,
So,
I said allegedly.
yeah.
I was joking.
I mean,
I mean,
what?
I'm sure he's done fucked up shit.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I mean,
It may not be a specific thing, but I'm sure he's done something.
he made Temple of Doom. I mean, there's, and the Lost World. So he's done crimes against humanity before.
Yeah.
But we're huge Woody Allen fans. In fact, I would go so far as to say I think he might be the best American screenwriter of all time. I don't think he has much
Mhm.
competition. I would say he's my favorite director. I don't think he's the best American filmmaker. I think there's directors that are better directors than him. Like, I don't think he's Martin Scorsese. I don't think he's Francis Ford
Right.
Coppola or anything. But his filmography, I believe it's 43 films at this point,
He's
44
making his
films.
50th right now.
Uh, The consistency, there's probably over 20 of them that are really good,
Yep.
great. Then I would say 10 or a dozen that are, okay, good. And then he has some
Mhm.
mediocre to, lesser great ones. But, the fact he made a movie a year for so long and it's this consistent, I mean, he really has nobody to be compared to in American cinema.
Not an American cinema. I mean, clearly the Bergman parallels are there. And I think a lot of that is because Bergman made a movie a year. And what's fascinating with him, once you learn more about his life, is he was a playwright. So he would do the stage productions, and that's how he kind of did his movies as well. And when you view them from that angle, it makes a lot more sense what he was doing.
Well,
And
that
I think Woody took that and applied that to American cinema.
well, also Woody started in television and stage work and did write
Mhm.
plays and worked for the Sid Caesar show. So it's funny, they do have very similar backgrounds too with the stage thing.
Yeah.
And Woody Allen's like a huge fan of like Streetcar Named Desire. He basically remade it with Blue Jasmine. He loves old theater. He loves old radio drama plays. He's clearly a fan of literature. He's a fan of European cinema more than American cinema. Those are his influences.
Yeah. I think it's also people don't recognize this, but what makes him so unique is that he's a working class guy, a high class society. So all his films viewing these rich characters, these socialites, is from a perspective of an outsider. And I think that working class mentality really shines through with his writing, with his directing, where he has this mentality, like, I got to be working all the time. Whereas a lot of people will do a movie and then take a year or two off, then do another project. I think Woody just works.
Well, he grew up in those poor neighborhoods, around World War II that a, a,
Yeah.
a lot of people at post that time did. I mean, there's a lot of people of the black community, the Italian community, obviously the Jewish community. So it's like he had a fantasy of being part of this upper class. Then he becomes rich,
Yeah.
famous, and successful. But I do agree, even though his films are about kind of cosmopolite characters, I was going to say WASP, but that wouldn't apply because they're all Jews. Um,
Yeah.
but these higher class, they understand art, they're articulate, they go to fancy dinners, they go to jazz clubs, they go play tennis and everything. He's more of an outsider observing it as like an intellectual or comedic exercise than he actually is that person in real life, and that's the interesting thing about him.
I almost see it as like, when you're a freshman and you're looking at maybe the seniors and there's like the cool kids, and you imagine what their lives are like, what they talk about, what it's like having a driver's license or whatever, a job. I feel like Woody is kind of that freshman looking at them. And so all these things are this fantastical version of rich people's lives. And he talks about that in his book, like I think he was crossing the river. I don't remember exactly. And just imagining like people in these movies he would go to see, just imagining what that life was like. And I think that's why something like Manhattan feels like a fairy tale, is because to him it still is, but yet he was disenfranchised by meeting these people and actually being in this society.
I
Speaking
agree.
of society, Woody Allen's Joker.
Watch the hell out of that movie.
Yeah.
I mean, he did work with Joaquin Phoenix. Basically, I mean, that's another movie I would
Yeah.
say shares DNA with this as a
Oh, it
Rational
definitely
Man.
does.
I like the match point comparison. I want to bring that up briefly before we get back into this movie. clearly the title of this movie is a play on Crime and Punishment by Dostoevsky. Match
Mhm.
Point, I would say, is essentially there's sequences in Match Point that are remaking sequences from Crime and Punishment. Particularly like a murder sequence late in the film is almost straight out of Crime and Punishment. Just done in a different context, obviously, because it's made like as a modern film
Mhm.
that takes place in the UK. I think the title's interesting. Crime and Punishment. So the idea is you commit a crime and you get punished for it. But then the
Yeah.
title here, Crimes and Misdemeanors, is that, a misdemeanor is a low thing to get charged with, like a speeding ticket would be a
Mhm.
misdemeanor. So to flip that on his head from Dostoevsky, which says you do get punished for bad things you do, there's judgment for what you do. Woody's saying that there's minor things that happen to people who commit the biggest crimes because of the power they have. Also, I think there's sort of crimes and is how bad something is, like a crime as in,
Yeah.
you
Well,
know,
it's paralleling the 2.
yeah, and then misdemeanor being a minor thing. So I think Woody Allen's story is the misdemeanor, and I think the
Right.
Martin Landau story is the crimes, and I think that's why it's the title.
Also, I think that it's saying, like, without objective morality, it's moral relativity. So it's like, oh, well, I just fantasize about cheating on my wife and leaving her for another woman, but I'm not as bad as someone who murdered his mistress. And it's like, well, okay, is wrong wrong? Is adultery a sin just as much as murder is, and from a religious perspective, or is there varying degrees of immorality?
Exactly. So the next note I have here, I just want to talk about real quick. Um, Angelica Houston being crazy sexy in this movie.
Yeah,
Because I guess a lot of people don't view Angelica Houston as a sex symbol because the context is probably like Royal Tenenbaums, maybe Morticia
yeah,
in Adam's Family.
yeah. I think Morticia, but I think John Wick too
But if you go back to the
is.
80s, if you go back to like Preezy's Honor when she was, I believe, married to Jack Nicholson in the 80s.
Yeah, I think she was with Polanski the night that all the shit went down.
So if you go back to her back in the day, um,
Actually, if you want to talk about fucked up, her being there with Polanski and her story about Woody,
I know
it's just another parallel.
there's a lot of layers here, which is why I think this film's aged in a way that other Woody Allen, like, I probably like a couple Woody Allen movies more than this, just like as favorites. But I think
Mhm.
as far as going back to rewatch them or look at them, this one's aged in a way with complexities that I think people didn't even wholly appreciate in 1989. I think now you look back on this and you're like, oh, wow, this is like a real achievement what he did here.
I think it's his most powerful movie as a whole.
I
Where
agree.
like the ending of Hannah and her sister is the most powerful thing he's done. It's a scene, I think. But I think that like just the scenes of like him seeing the body, going to see it, the scenes of her calling are so tense. When he's driving and he goes to meet the hitman brother, it's just fucking heavy. It's just powerful. It has that Bergman thing, which this has one of Bergman's cinematographers, so
It has
it
his
makes
main
sense.
cinematographer, really.
Yeah, Lindqvist, I think his name is.
Yes, I think Sven Limfist.
Yeah, I'm so bad at foreign
I
names.
know.
I did.
I
I was
knew
trying not to bring him up the whole video.
that was my thing when you said it. I go, you son of a bitch. Because I was just gonna be like, oh, Bergen's cinematographer shot this anyway. I was like, don't say that name. I think we did okay.
I think we might have just said the guy who wrote "Don't Let the Right One In." We might have attributed him to filming this, but
Thomas Alfredson, I think, was that guy's name.
I think his last name's Lindqvist.
Maybe, I don't know. I thought it
The
was
guy who wrote the
Alfredson.
book.
Oh, my bad. I was thinking of the
Yes,
director of the
sorry.
movie. Yeah, you're right. You're right. But the Angelica Houston thing. Now, I'm not just saying this in the fact that she's sexy and attractive in this, but the concept as a man we all struggle with, the crazy woman that you're insanely attracted to that you
The
should
woman,
avoid at all costs.
the woman who will kill herself if she can't have you because she wants you so bad.
And why that turns you on so much.
Yeah, like Rihanna, please stop calling. You can build a life without me.
You don't need me anymore.
You have a baby with ASAP Rocky.
Well, it's just interesting to see Woody Allen do this kind of character because in a lot of movies,
Yeah.
Because the one that comes to me that triggers me, that reminds me of an ex-girlfriend, is Hannah Baker from 13 Reasons Why. I think she's the scariest character ever in fiction. That's
Hmm.
just awful. So that's too real. But to see Woody Allen do his version of it, where he really doesn't play it for a lot of laughs. There's some really earnest scenes with these flashbacks with Landau and her, and the way that she's
Yeah.
acting in those sequences and the conversations they have when she talks about her mother told her that she could look deep into her eyes and see the soul inside of her, and that she
Hmm.
had a deep soul, and he kind of looks into her eyes and says something about them being beautiful. There's a scene where they're on the beach together, like jogging, and she talks about how good a shape he's in.
It's very voyeuristic the way it's shot,
Yeah.
and it captures like that forbidden romance feeling of like an office romance or something where it's just a vacation all the time. And those like what was it called? The honeymoon period of a relationship, I think captures immaculately. But also the eyes line parallels when he sees her corpse and looks into it and says he sees nothing.
Yeah, it's fucked up. Well, it's weird because those sequences make you sympathize with the humanity of her character, but Woody never tilts it
Yeah.
us too much because you always kind of see that she's a little crazy at the same time.
Yeah, which also doesn't. It's funny because she's never really, other than Martin Landau trying to kind of almost really gaslight her, where it seems like he promised her things but was lying and all that. But like, blames her because he's trying to escape any kind of responsibility for his actions. But she also chose to be romantically involved with a married man and expected him to actually follow through on these promises, knowing that he's a dishonest, disloyal man. But the complexity too of like seeing the relationship as this beautiful, sweet thing, while it's also so fucked up, and how he manipulated and used her. Um, she's crazy, but just because she's crazy, does she deserve to be used like an object?
Yeah, that's the difficult thing with this character is I want to feel bad for her, but it's done in such a way where those sequences when she is just kind of losing it, like when she's
Yeah.
yelling at him in the kitchen, you become uncomfortable. And
Well,
also, if the first time you
here's
see
the
this
issue.
movie, you don't know where it's gonna go. You don't know if he's.
Yeah.
That's the struggle of the movie the first time. Is he going to do something horrible, or is he going to feel bad and not do it? That's because the first time I saw the movie, I didn't know.
Yeah. No, it's a big shock. And in Woody Allen movies, people don't typically get killed in a serious fashion. Like there's like
Yeah,
Bullets Over Broadway where it's like a very funny mobster thing,
that's true.
but it's not like, in Annie Hall, people are getting capped.
Yeah, when Christopher Walken's driving him, they have a car accident.
And he dies.
He just dies at the end of Annie Hall. That's a fair
But
point. Yeah.
well, one thing with this movie, and I think this is what really resonates with men watching this movie, and this is the true crime aspect of it. And I do think Woody Allen makes like an awesome true crime movie in this, but you're always asking yourself when you're like watching the serial killer things like, oh, you stupid piece of shit, you buried her in your own backyard. I wouldn't have done that. And so I was like, what would I do if I was this terrible person to not get caught? For some reason, we identify with people that are fucked up, even if we are repulsed by them. Similarly, even though Martin Landau's character, he doesn't seem like he seems like a complex person. I don't think he's a bad person. He does horrible things, but you identify with him just enough that you think, okay, if my side bitch was threatening to tell my wife and ruin my life, what would I do? Would I get away with it? And whereas most movies have that moment of the was it Denouement, I believe it's pronounced. Uh, this movie doesn't, where he never gets his comeuppance, he never gets put in handcuffs. Uh, and I think it's funny because you think it's rewarding, where it's like you have all this tension. Is he going to get caught? Is he going to go to jail? Is his family going to find out? And then his family doesn't. He's perfectly okay. And you feel almost robbed of that. And you feel kind of guilty and fucked up yourself for identifying and sympathizing with his struggle. And then when he gets exactly what he wants and you parasocially kind of wanted, you realize how fucked up it is.
It's what's shocking about the ending is that you kind of sat there the first time. I mean, that's just how I was when I was a teenager when I first saw this movie because it was kind of late in my Woody Allen rotation. I think I'd seen a dozen of his films before I watched this one. I'd heard the hype about this one, that it was one of his best. But where it ultimately goes when Martin Landau does, and even after he does it, you're like, okay, there's going to be consequence. He's going to feel bad about it. And then the way that Woody Allen wraps it up,
Yeah.
I don't want to quite get to the ending yet because I think we should talk about the end sequence between the two
Yeah.
characters kind of later on. But it's shocking when the reality of everything hits you at the end of the movie. Like it really, he teases it.
Yeah.
Woody teases it the whole movie where things are gonna go, but then he like fully commits to it in the third act in a way that he rarely does in any of his movies.
It's one of the very few transcendently nihilistic movies. You don't usually see transcendence in cinema as a negative thing, where it's so overwhelmingly, and it's not like disgusting gore. It's not just straight up depressing, because I don't think it's even a depressing movie, really. It's just a philosophically unsettling movie.
It's a very entertaining movie.
Yeah, it's one of his funniest movies too. That's the crazy part to me, is that all the Cliff stuff is some of the best, one of the best Woody Allen characters. His relationship with Mia is really charming in it. And it's actually aged like wine, because when you're younger and watched it, like I saw as a teenager too, you fully identify with Woody. You're like, oh, they need to get together, you know. And then as you get older and watch it, you see all the little signs that she's not into him, she's into Alan Alda, and that he's actually being pathetic and he's simping like crazy.
I have that in here. Well, we could talk about that later. I have a note in here, but I agree
Okay.
with you on that. So the next thing I want to cover, I have Woody's friendship with the niece. How are we supposed to look at this as anything but creepy now in a certain context?
Yeah.
Um,
Last
so
time I watched the movie, I showed it to a friend, and when it showed them in the theater, the first shot I said, pictured Woody Allen on a date.
well, because I think this is honestly one of the sweetest relationships in one of his movies, as a Woody Allen
Yeah.
persona.
It's very wholesome.
That he goes to the movies with this little girl. It's because there's characters to reflect purity in the world and goodness to counter some of the evil things that happen.
Yeah.
So this relationship with the niece is done that way. But if you believe the Woody Allen accusations, right? If you believe that Woody Allen
Mhm.
is this groomer of children, this is aged very poorly in that sense because it's odd. He's almost
Yeah.
like dating this little girl and confining in her in these
Yeah, well,
sequences.
it's tough too, because it's kind of a comedy trope now, like movies like 500 Days of Summer have the kid's sister who's wise beyond her years. And the trope of a child being wise beyond their years, in my opinion, is kind of concerning in general, because kids are kids. This idea of this like um oracle type child who knows the secrets of life, but they also like Pokemans, isn't real.
I've never
That's
met
a
that.
Hollywood fantasy.
I've never met that kid in my life.
No, and knowing what Hollywood does to children, I find it deeply concerning that it's like, oh, well, some kids actually, they're actually smarter than most adults. No, they're not.
Well, it's to make
Not one.
to not make children children.
Exactly.
It's to age them up. So without being overt, what you're saying, but it's to sexualize them indirectly.
Yeah.
Because if
Well,
they're
even
not a
that show.
child, it's not wrong.
What about this? Isn't a direct tie. I'm not saying this is the point of the show, but are you smarter than a third grader? Yes. Show me the smartest third grader. I'm twice as smart as him
Well, I think
or
you
her.
already failed because the show is called "Are You Smarter Than a Fifth Grader?"
Is it really?
Yeah, so there's some fifth
Fuck.
grader right now with his arms crossed like idiot.
Wearing a black shirt with some flames down at the bottom.
He's the real Chad. Little Chads. little
Takes
Ch-
a sip from his Mountain Dew.
little Chads, big titties. So there's a line here that he says to the niece that I love, because the Cliff persona, I do think Cliff's one of his best characters. I think the Hannah and her sister's character I think is the best of the classic mainline Woody Allen, or you could say Manhattan, because I think Manhattan's actually his best performance in one of his movies,
Yeah.
just
Well,
acting wise.
Isaac also, one thing that people don't give him credit for, they think he's playing himself in every movie, but that's because you're filtering through the recognition of the human playing the character. If you look at the writing, these are very different characters with different flaws. And Cliff is not the same as Hannah and her sisters, who is not the same as Albie Singer. Um, what is the movie? It's a black and white one. We were talking about it just recently.
Broadway Danny Rose.
Yes, Broadway Danny Rose is nothing like his other characters, but yet you have to act as though every character is the same because he's a character actor who plays an archetype. But it's always filtered through the narrative in a very different way.
Underrated actor, Woody Allen. I know he
Yeah.
doesn't show a lot of range, but these characters are different. They have different distinctions and ticks about them. They have different quirks. There's a lot of nuances to it that people, because I do think people project Woody Allen onto it, and I don't actually think he's
Yeah.
a lot of these people. I think Alvy Singer is
No.
probably pretty close to who he is at that time. I
Part of
think
me wonders too, though, and this could be him trying to excuse it, him saying that like, he's not like his characters. He's more of like a sports guy. He actually seems a lot more like Larry David
I
than a Woody
agree.
Allen character.
Hmm.
And I do wonder, especially with his air of comedy, his stand-up comedy, him being a joke writer from back in the day for other comedians. I wonder how much of it is this kind of like Abbott and Costello persona that he just carries into his movies and filters differently.
I think it's a lot of it, big time. Albert on Costello. I said that wrong, but Jerry Seinfeld said that that was a big influence on him and Larry David creating Seinfeld. I mean, that's the big thing with Woody Allen that has to be acknowledged. He did Seinfeld before Seinfeld. Woody Allen leads to When
Yeah.
Harry Met Sally. When Harry Met Sally feels like a proto Seinfeld episode. The conversations that Billy Crystal and Meg Ryan have in that movie are very Seinfeld. Nora Ephron wrote it. Rob Reiner makes it and produces through Castle Rock. Castle Rock
Mm.
produces Seinfeld. Larry David, New York Jewish comedian,
Rob Reiner worked with Woody Allen.
yeah. I mean, so you see the trajectory here. Like none of the Woody Allen movies ever were huge hits. His biggest movies were like Annie Hall and Manhattan and Hannah, and they made like 40 million. When Harry Met Sally makes 90 million, it's a blockbuster, essentially. Huge, brings rom-coms back into the mainstream, kicks off the 90s. Then this sets up Seinfeld, where the characters are essentially having Woody Allen conversations and interacting in Woody Allen scenarios, and it becomes the biggest television show of all time. So I think that factor, they kind of like to push it to a side that Woody Allen sets up Seinfeld and it becoming mainstream. So when we think about him in terms of like, oh, well, he's almost like this movie, I don't even think you can get a Blu-ray of it. A lot of his movies
Actually,
don't
they're
have.
re-releasing all of his movies on Blu-rays recently. They do it in waves. Like I just picked up Bananas and uh, oh shit, Love and Death on Blu-ray. That was the first wave. Was like the golden age of like, the slapstick comedies. Then I think in October they did like the classic years of his more elevated movies. So I think this one is out on Blu-ray now, but
He,
very recently.
he has a line to the niece that I quoted here because I agree with this wholeheartedly, and it sets up part of the thematic truths of this movie. Because I think a lot of this movie, comedically and tragically, is directly just speaking. It's like one big truth bomb. The whole movie. So he says to her at one point, your lesson, don't listen to your teachers at school. Just see what they look like, and that'll tell you all about life. I think it's
The movie's
true.
full. The movie's full of great one-liners, little witticisms. I think my favorite. He says, he's talking about, uh, it's very difficult to get your head and your heart to agree on anything. I forget the exact way it's phrased, but I've definitely thought that at certain times in my life, and
I
that sets up the movie too, where you're getting involved in a situation, your head says no, but your heart says yes, and then you get in over your head.
but the big lesson here that I've been preaching since I was a child, don't listen to teachers. Don't follow into that. The thing that I hate
Yeah.
most in movies or that's been projected by English majors or writers or characters or filmmakers and artists is the holy grand life-changing teacher character, the Dead Poets Society Robin Williams character. I hate that character. The
What about this? How many writers began as teachers?
probably all of them on some level.
Yeah, I mean, like Stephen King,
Yeah.
like I bet most screenwriters taught for a bit before they were
Yeah, it's
screenwriters.
it's a propaganda thing, and some people don't want to hear this, but I'm not anti teachers, but I think the praise of teachers. I mean, Norm Macdonald had bits about this for years about teachers. They're the real heroes.
There's there's only one good type of teacher, I've always said, a gym teacher.
Oh hell yeah! Yeah, somebody wants to get me in shape. But this idea that somebody can teach you things, they're an expert on the only 6 subjects you learn in school out of, everything. And
Yeah.
and just like anybody else, there's stupid teachers, there's mean teachers, there's smart teachers, there's good teachers. I've
It's
had
like
the
cops.
totally. Yeah, not all teachers. But they really this idea of like this teacher. I mean, the moment somebody starts telling me the story about a teacher they had in school that changed their life, I immediately like the person telling the story 20% less. It knocks credibility down for me when they start telling me that. I'm like, oh, you got manipulated by somebody, and it's like when people tell you about their dreams. I'm like, I don't care. Don't go into this bullshit. It doesn't mean anything. It's okay. I know that's just
Did
cynical.
I ever tell you about my dream teacher? Changed my life. I had a dream with this teacher, and
Well, this idea that he says here that see what they look like, and that's what really matters in life. Um, that's not 100% true, obviously, but this idea you get kind of sold in life is that if you learn something, if you become an expert at something, that'll help you get ahead in the thing. But then, good-looking people or charismatic people can get further than you, despite maybe their lack of knowledge in the same things. It's an important lesson in life.
yeah, well, it gets down into like just genetic lottery.
Exactly. What you fall into, not just your genetics, but what family you're born into, the circumstances that you start with,
Yep.
that you have no control over, is a big part of life as opposed to, okay, I can acquire these things and then it'll get me to the place I want to be. No, just because you acquire those things doesn't mean you're going to get
Well,
to that place.
very true to this movie. And what really stands out to me looking back on it at this point in my life, being nearly 30, is that the people that I see doing the best, like the teachers, a lot of people I know that I went to school with are teachers now. And I'm not saying they're bad people or anything, but some of them are fucking stupid. Like it worries me that you're teaching the next generation of kids. And I'm not saying that as an insult, like you're just not a thinker. That's just not your forte. And similarly, the people that I see doing the best in this current economy that are really succeeding are some of the shittiest people.
Yeah.
It's very rare. Like a lot of people that I know that are very honest are the people that do get fired.
Yeah.
The hardest workers are the ones that get passed up for the promotion. You're just getting beaten down and punished for having integrity. You're just getting put on a cross every day.
Anecdotally, I've had the same exact experience where you go to a job and the hardest workers are undervalued. The people who usually get up into management positions are very
Are good
snaky.
looking.
Yes, or they're good looking, or they're charismatic. People like hanging out with them.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
And I've seen the counterpoint. To be fair, I've seen it a lot.
but I always say to people, and they want to know how to get ahead in a company, they think if I work harder, my advice is always get the people who are bosses to like you. Be in the office with them,
Yeah.
hanging out, make jokes with them. Be the kind of person they want to go have a drink with, and then they'll let you in their club.
Yeah, I think joking is a very underrated job skill. Knowing how to joke, knowing where to draw the line. Um, I guarantee I've gotten promotions probably because I was known for being funny a time or two.
So I'm ready to get to him now because we've been going on a little bit. I'm ready to get into the meat of some of the standout things about this movie. Alan
Kosher meat
Alan
being a Woody
Alda
Allen movie.
Alan Alda is on fire in this, and he
Yep.
mentions a show concept. He has a tape recorder where he pitches ideas, and he has one where he pitches a show about a Donald Trump type. So I asked this question: does Alan Alda in this movie predict Trump 2016 happening? That really caught me
I
off
mean,
guard when that happened on the rewatch.
that's how Sopranos was for me, where it's season 6 and there's they're talking, and I think it's like the first episode of 6B, and they're talking about who should be president. And one of them says someone like Donald Trump. And then AJ in the last episode wants to be Donald Trump's bodyguard. But anyhow, with this, Alan Alda in this is such a super Chad in this movie that I think he reaches Chad levels where he does see the future.
Well, the thing that was weird on the rewatch this time was you brought up the thing earlier about when you're a teenager. Even when we were first hanging out and we talked about this movie, because I think you had just watched it
Yeah.
recently at that time.
Probably, yeah.
Because you brought up like how much you related to the letter at the end, and I ripped most of it from
Oh
James
yeah.
Joyce.
That's why there were so many references to Dublin.
Yeah. I ripped. Yeah, it's like I ripped off most of it from Stalin. Um, but Alan Alda in this, when I viewed it as a teenager, I hated this guy. I thought, what a
Yeah.
fucking schmuck, what an asshole, what a self-entitled
What a
asshole.
buffoon.
This really changed my perception as an adult. Uh,
My most recent viewing did.
I don't think he's an asshole.
No.
I don't think he's in the wrong in pretty much anything he does. I think Cliff is definitely more in the wrong than his character.
Yeah.
I think Mia Farrow's right at the end when he says he is warm and giving and friendly. On this watch, all I
Yeah.
noticed was how sweet he is. He's a people person. He cares about his sister very clearly. It's like established. He thinks about the
Imagine
things.
this.
He thinks about the things Woody Allen says to him too. He doesn't just take them and they bounce off of him. He contemplates. He asks his sister at the end. He goes, "Am I a
Yeah.
phony?"
Well, think about this. So you don't get along with your brother-in-law, but you give him a job producing a movie about you. You're successful, so you let him in on your job. We'll just say that. You hire your brother-in-law, you don't get along with it, you think's a loser because you love your sister. And then he's trying to cheat on your sister with the producer or a manager or whoever on this job that he got through his wife that is your sister. Is the asshole in that situation?
Yeah, that's all I got from this is Woody Allen's a fucking asshole in this. I mean, in that sense, I don't think his character Cliff is like an asshole, or because
Well,
we have to
he's
bring up.
just
We're not mentioning
he's
that
self-absorbed.
the marriage is they haven't had sex
Done.
in over a year, so he's not like
It's
having this affair while he's in a happy marriage with children.
no.
He's wanting to have
It's
an
clearly
affair at a marriage that's at its end point. So that is a context to
yeah.
add to this.
If the movie was made today, he would be scrolling through our dead bedrooms. But the thing with Alan Alda, I realized the most recent time I watched it is that the closest parallel I have is actually Charlie and Donald Kaufman in Adaptation, where I think Alan Alda's character in this is Donald Kaufman, where he seems like a hack, he seems like a dumbass, but he has a lot more depth. It's just this movie reveals that he doesn't have like the best speech in film ever. He just gets like subtle moments where he shows that.
Well, and don't be wrong, he's still because I almost think it's almost too much. I think he's playing such a caricature of this kind of jerk persona that I think it's
Yeah.
almost out of sync with the rest of the movie, which feels very
Hmm.
real. Every time Alan Alda shows up, it's like, am I watching a different movie than the one we
Yeah.
get? But God, is he? Because Alan Alda, he's Hawkeye. He's known for being kind of a smart ass character, and he's in a few other
Yeah.
movies. But just to cast him as a you know, a a guy who gets laid a lot. He's this kind of dude. He's hitting on the girl in the room. It's such perfect casting in a Woody
Yeah.
Allen movie, and he's such a tall, dominant figure, and Woody Allen's a little guy. There's just a lot of
Yeah.
genius in and the fact that he's having to film this guy, the conflict of this. What if you had to make something your livelihood was on the stake of somebody that you absolutely loathe?
And the whole thing is he has to make a movie about him, making him look good.
And he can't do it. He's such a
He doesn't have it in
self-absorbed
him.
guy. He takes the footage and shows it to him, and he compares him to, I think it was Stalin,
I think it's Stalin,
and he's
yeah.
like, "You think no one's ever been compared to Stalin before?" But he makes this footage, and when I first saw it, I remember laughing at that scene. I mean, it is funny Woody up front laughing his performance
Yeah,
is like,
it's
but I watch it now, and I'm like, "Yeah, are you crazy?
exactly. Of course he got fired.
Yeah,
It was a career suicide move.
what's wrong with you?" And that he doesn't see how that makes him unattractive to the Mia Farrow character. That his
Yeah,
actions, because the number one thing you can do to mess up something with a chick is to come across as insecure and negative. A woman does not want that from
yeah,
you. If you're the lesser guy in the situation, you have to present yourself as the better man. So yeah, the guy's
yeah.
richer than you. He's more handsome. He's got things, and all he's doing is complaining about the guy. Which I'm sure we've both made this mistake with women before. I know I have.
Mhm.
You talk all this shit, and the other guy's not talking bad. He's not saying bad things about you, and he's not saying bad things about
Mhm.
other men. He's focusing on the woman while you're sitting around going, I hate this guy. This guy's a hack. I'm so talented. Nobody appreciates me. You're just a negative person.
Mhm.
And then you don't seem professional. Because I think he may have had a shot with the Mia Farrow character on some level, but I think he blows it over the course of the movie in a big way. I think if he did
Yeah.
have a shot, he blows it by the way he acts about the Alan Alda thing, which becomes a turn off to
Right.
her. And I really picked up on that this viewing. Because I used to see it younger, like, oh, they had this beautiful love story and then she betrays him. But I don't see it that way at all. Now it's clearly established.
No.
She's been talking to the Alan. I mean, it's a horrifying scene. There's a scene where he calls her on the phone after they all have dinner
No,
together.
it's rough.
And he's like, what do you mean he's over there? And it's like, being in those situations, it's hard
Yeah,
not
it's
to
too much.
it's hard not to yeah, fuck the killing the mistress plot line. That shit, calling a woman and
Yeah, whatever. Get over it.
the guy she told you not to worry about is over there. Just that look on
Well,
Woody Allen's face, it's like, oh shit.
I think what's also fascinating is that, and I did see this in a YouTube video today. I was just watching different interpretations of the movie, and one thing brought up is that instead of Woody having like a moral dilemma, he applies that to film almost. Or instead of God, he or like a Christ figure, he has that philosopher he wants to make the documentary on, and he turns Alan Alda into like the Antichrist, and the whole thing is to him it's a struggle of integrity. He's so wrapped up in this kind of artistic, creative moralism that he's in his own way. He's self-destructive. He thinks that he's above all this stuff, but really he's kind of below it by being unprofessional. Where it's like, well, of course people don't want to work with someone who would turn this, PBS documentary into some gag reel with Stalin in it. Of course you're not going to get work.
Well, it's a fluff piece. All he needed to do, I mean, because now I watch the movie, it's that 500 Days of Summer thing. You just see a guy making mistakes. What he
Yeah.
should have done, especially as in his age in this movie, he's not playing like a 25
He's
year
like
old.
40s.
Yeah, easily, maybe even pushing 50, to be
Yeah.
honest. You would think the idea would be he's showing her this footage. She likes what he's showing her. He has this job. He should do the job, execute it really well, impress the Alan Alda character, get her to produce the thing he wants to make, one for me, one for you, and then
Exactly.
move somewhere forward in his life. But basically, the Martin Landau character made a mistake. He has to correct it and gets away with it. The Woody Allen character is set up in a good position. Some luck comes into his life, and
Yep.
then he chooses to destroy it. So the characters kind of
He,
have opposite paths at the same time.
he's too vain to realize that a good thing's fallen into his lap. He sees this blessing as a burden.
Yeah, if he didn't have the connection via the wife as the sister, he wouldn't be getting any
Yeah.
work. But he gets lucky in this situation where he's like, oh, this rich guy who's successful is hanging out in New York now. He's going to give me a job. I'm going to get something on television, and it's going to open up doors for me. And
And you also see what's fascinating is you see why his wife's so miserable through his character. Because he's clearly way too old to be a bum. Like he's out of work. His documentaries don't make money. And he's basically refusing to work. He's almost strong armed into taking this job, it feels like. And then he reluctantly, begrudgingly takes this job that his wife sets up for him using her brother, which, probably was humbling to say the least for her to ask her brother to give her husband work. Um, and then he fucks it up, and you kind of realize, like, oh, his wife's not some cold-hearted bitch. She's been dealing with this for years.
I also think it's implied heavily that the money is from her end, like their house
Hmm.
and the life that they have, and she has
Yeah,
a job,
definitely.
and that he's taking that for granted as well
Yeah.
in a big way. But just Alan Alda's performance, so his famous lines in here. Let's talk about this conceptually. What do you think about this? Because Woody Allen thinks this is hacky and hates it. This has been in my head ever since I rewatched it. If it bends, it's funny. If it breaks, it's not funny. Comedy is tragedy plus time. And he says this over
Yeah.
and over again every time he's in a
When
room
Abe
giving
Lincoln
his.
died, people weren't joking about it. It was too soon.
So let me ask you conceptually, what do you think of this concept that if something bends, it's funny, and if it breaks, it's not funny? Do you think there's any truth to that?
I think in a broad comedy sense, looking at it as like, so let's say he's like a Chuck Lorre type. He was a mega comedy sitcom producer making like Full House type shows. Yes, that's safe. That's going to resonate with the most people. But it's risk adverse. And I think most people who tell a lot of jokes understand that a lot of the high of like a good performance or telling a good joke is the risk in it paying off. Where something that you don't think is going to be funny gets major laughs. So I mean, I guess it works as a guideline if you want to be a Bill Cosby type, but
Playing the line, right? So you're bending the comedic concept as opposed to breaking it and going to a drastic place,
yeah,
right?
and I think Woody specifically is, yeah, like you said, he thinks it's hacky. He wants to break it. That's the entire point of his career, really, is he became this comedy filmmaker after being a comedian, and then he broke it by being this like weird postmodern.
Yeah, I don't know what
He
he's
does like
doing.
dramedies and art house movies
Well,
and
I laughed
thrillers.
at that psychiatrist character because we made a movie, and I never made this comparison. We made a movie years ago where this guy's making a movie, and he has this director he admires, and all I could think about was that character and the
Well,
way that.
I think it was a pretty direct. I
Well,
feel like I probably knew it at the time.
it must have been a subconscious thing because the way we edit it into
Yeah.
the movie is exactly the same as it's edited into this movie. It's like exact where you just cut to a clip of a guy talking at a camera, and he's like this eccentric, and he's basically stating the themes of the movie. Because I remember at the time we watched the clips and we said, "Oh, I don't like how he's obviously stating the themes of our movie." But then I watched this, and Woody
Mhm.
Allen's doing the exact same thing. Every time the guy
Yeah.
talks, he's just explaining the thesis, and maybe you get away with it under a certain context of authority. The other concept here, I think there's some truth to this: comedy is tragedy plus time. I actually think
Yeah.
that one's
I agree.
interesting. You give something 20 years, it's funny now. 9/11's a meme now. We don't really look at it as this
Yeah.
real concept, even
Well,
though it's like a horrifying thing that affected all, like our world, and we're living in a
well,
post world of that.
that is the difference. Is that we live in such a radically postmodern, memeified, nihilistic time that like even the nihilism of this movie, like if you explained the themes of this movie to someone the year it came out, it would seem very transgressive, shocking. Nowadays, I think that's what most people walking around feel about the world. Like, I don't even, it used to be tra- tragedy or comedy is tragedy plus time. Now, I mean, if no matter what happens in the world, it's awful. A celebrity dies, there's a terrorist attack, there's a pandemic, whatever. You go into 4chan in 20 minutes, there's going to be 100 jokes about it.
I agree. My next thing, what's the message of this movie? Is Woody saying that without God, morality really doesn't matter? The center debate of a moral structure, forgiveness is brought up frequently. Martin Landau doesn't
Mhm.
think, as he has these conversations with the rabbi character, there's these wonderful sequences. There's probably only about 3 of them where he has conversations with him as opposed to the conversations with his brother Jerry. And a big thing is he doesn't think his wife would forgive him for the thing that he does. Because the other outcome of this is that he just tells his family the truth. It doesn't ruin his life. They forgive him, and then nothing bad has to happen. But he can't believe, because of almost his nihilistic, godless point of view, that forgiveness is even an option. And he says to the Angelica Houston character at one point when they're on the beach together jogging that I think they're talking about classical music or opera, and he says, "It reminds
Yeah.
me of you, the sad one."
Well, speaking of the rabbi brother, or the rabbi and the brother, it's interesting too structurally how Woody gives his character an angel and a devil on each of his shoulders. Where he has a rabbi talking about forgiveness, and then he has the hit me on brother being like, "No, we'll just kill her."
I like Jerry a lot.
Yeah, I was thinking a lot about his line today after he says that the job's done, and Landau's freaking out, and he's like, "It's okay, you're white." It was like that's such a modern joke to say in reaction to someone worrying about getting caught for a crime. You're white, it's okay.
Well, that's the next point I want to bring up because we haven't talked a lot about individual character beats and stuff. So a big thing in this, Bill Hader has a bit about this. He talks about Fred Armisen, where there's the sequence where Martin Landau's talking to Jerry about the idea of murdering the Angelica Houston character. And Jerry basically keeps saying like, well, there's a way to get rid of it. And then Martin Landau keeps saying like, so what you're saying is, and he does this like 6 times. My watch on this was weird. I never saw it this way, that Martin Landau, I think, is manipulating the brother almost into this more so, but trying to give himself like a scapegoat from
Yeah.
association.
Well, he almost wants to place the blame on the brother, just like he wants to place the blame on Angelica Houston, where he's like, "Oh, my degenerate, low-class brother did this awful thing that I got roped into. Not I called my brother to kill this person to get myself out of a mess."
Well, this is a comparison I want to bring up that I've never heard about this movie, and the Jerry scenes in particular really hit me with this. I think there's a proto-Sopranos thing to this movie in a big
Yeah.
way. It predates Goodfellas. We had a conversation not too long ago about how there's a little bit of the Goodfellas Pulp Fiction thing in Annie Hall with some of its fly-on-the-wall filmmaking. And those scenes with Jerry and Landau and their conversations and that
The scene at
character,
the beach house is straight out of
that's
Sopranos.
exactly The Sopranos. And I never made that comparison. Because Goodfellas is clearly the biggest inspiration for Sopranos, but this comes out a year before. And that sequence,
Mhm.
all I could think about was sequences from Sopranos. Those are like David Chase conversations, and the cinematography looks like. Also, the moral conflict at the center of The Sopranos is the same one as this movie. Tony
The
Soprano's
sequence
struggle is the struggle of this movie.
the, the sequence where Landau goes to his childhood home and sees the family talk, that's straight out of a dream sequence in Sopranos.
Yeah, I never saw it before. That's all I could think was watching this, and I wanted to ask. I'm glad you think that way because it just hit me like huge. I
Yeah,
was like, "Holy shit! This like these scenes could be in The Sopranos." Uh,
definitely.
And it's weird to think about from Italian context because I always felt David Chase's writing and stuff felt more kind of Jewish than it ever did Italian. He doesn't even
Yeah.
really look that Italian. I remember heard Michael Imperioli say that once. He's like, David Chase is some white guy. He's not Italian. When they were
I never
casting,
thought of him as Italian.
no, and
I don't know if he is, but he
he
never
he,
struck
he
me as
is.
one.
No, he's Italian.
Oh, okay.
The mother's based off his Italian mother. But yeah, I don't know. I just wanted to bring that up. I think the Jerry character fits perfectly within the Sopranos universe. The
Yeah, well,
brother.
also, Paulie is in a ton of Woody Allen movies in small roles.
Well, also just kind of the Woody Allen New York thing. Sopranos had a lot of New York directors. A lot of the
Yeah.
actors are from New York. It might be a New York thing. I think that's a big part of it, tying to the Scorsese thing. Uh,
Well, also, the concept of a mobster going to therapy is a Woody Allen concept. When you look at the whole, I
exactly.
mean, the whole counselor subplot is all like that high class stuff. It's all Woody Allen, and all the writers, not all of them, but a lot of them had like degrees in psychology and stuff.
Yeah.
They weren't mobsters that became screenwriters.
Yeah, I would bet money that David Chase is a big fan of this movie.
Hmm.
I would say, yeah, because I thought of the psychiatrist stuffs too. I thought that did feel out of Woody Allen. I want to bring up this part real quick because I always forget about this sequence. Um, I was taken aback by it. It's almost the most shocking moment in the film for me on the recent watch. When he goes over to see the niece and give her a book at the sister's house, and then the
Yeah,
sister tells her story about meeting a guy from the personal ads. The conversation they
I'm a
have
sensible gal. Not
is
anymore. You're not.
insane. Like
It may be
what
the craziest Woody Allen joke ever.
It's insane. She basically there's like they show the sequence of events and like flashbacks of her dancing with this guy, and then it sets up to the point that she reveals that this guy tied her up. There's this pretty intense sequence where he's being rough with her, but she kind of digs it.
Yeah.
And then apparently he takes a shit on her,
Yep.
and
Dad move.
she tells her mom, she tells Woody Allen about this. He's like, "What's wrong with you? Why would you do that?" I mean, it's crazy. This is like
His
deconstruct.
reaction's so funny.
It's like
This is the
deconstructing
worst
him.
thing I've ever heard.
Yeah, I know. It's like deconstructing Harry Woody Allen. It feels like it's in an R-rated movie. I mean, all of a sudden,
Yeah.
like the murder plot line, the Mia Farrow thing, nothing is as crazy as this sequence, and I always forget about it. It's insane. The way that the sister's acting in this scene while she tells the story.
What makes it even better
It's
is when he goes home to his wife and she's reading, and it's like, a strange man defecated on my sister. He says, "Why?" in the most disinterested voice. He's like, I don't know. What answer could I have that would?
Yeah. I have that next. I have that next. He goes home. This shows the marriage. He goes home, and as a guy,
Yeah,
he clearly wants to stay up all night and talk about this. And the
exactly.
wife says, "I have to get up at 7," because he hints at sexuality. He's almost implying like maybe we should
Yeah,
have sex.
maybe I should try that on you.
That's basically what he's saying. And she's like, "I have to get up at 7," and she turns off the lights. Yeah, that thing about this movie being one of Woody Allen's gems. Is things like that's just like this little
Yeah,
5-minute sequence that's hidden inside of this movie, and
it's basically a short film.
it's one of the best things he's ever done, and you forget
Yeah,
about it, and you watch it, and you're like, "Wow, that's brilliant." That's like the Annie Hall, Christopher Walken sequence at the house and then the car. There's these little bits like
yeah,
that are,
and it's
uh
funny every time I see it too.
my next thing is, where would you rank this in Woody Allen's filmography? Where does this place in I mean, I gotta say this has always gotta be like a top 5 objectively, if you're doing like
Mhm.
an objective list. I think on a
Yeah,
personal list, this is maybe like 3 or 4 for me because it is just so painful. Like I respect it more than I do a lot of his other
yeah.
films, but this film brings out as entertaining and as amazing and impressed with it I am. And in some ways I do think it's his most accomplished film. It makes me uncomfortable not only with what it's about, but not seeing Woody Allen inside of it. There does seem to be an element of if the Sun Yi thing, that the negative part of it, right, that he was grooming her as a teenager, that he took the pictures early.
Yeah.
The timeline matches up here. They started going to the baseball games in the late 80s, early 90s. This comes out in 89. It almost feels like if you want to read it in a certain way, he's dealing with the idea that he did something wrong and then he doesn't feel guilty
Mhm.
about it. And that's the inspiration for the movie. It's hard not to look at it that way. That was really egging, like, because you could say, okay, he just clearly likes Russian literature and he just
Yeah.
did these things. But I wonder if that's what makes this so personal. Even let's say, even if he didn't do the grooming thing, let's say that he just had the affair, which he did. We know this. He had an
Yeah.
affair with his girlfriend's adopted child that was 20 years old while he was like 50, and that he
Yeah.
doesn't feel bad about it, which clearly he doesn't with all these years. I do think there's a connection to that and what this movie is and why it's so powerful. I think it's him
Well, I
existentially
think
dealing with those things.
and if it is about that or not, what's fascinating too is that it gets into the concept of crimes and misdemeanors where you could say, like, I relate to the movie in a lot of ways, and I haven't done that yet in my life. I haven't cheated on a woman with her daughter yet. So I could say, oh, well, I've never done anything that bad. So I'm better than him, but I still relate to it in the same way. And it gets into that level of the universality of guilt or the fear of being caught, the fear of facing consequences for your own actions.
But where would you put this? Where is this in your Woody Allen?
For me, it's number one. It's
Okay.
always been my favorite. It's not the one I watch the most. There's others that I watch a lot more. It's like I always say with some albums, they're so good you only listen to them like it's a holiday. You pull it out once a year and listen to it, and it's like you make a day of it because it's just too powerful. And this movie does have that for me. But for me, more than anything, and this is when I know that something's really made an impact on me is after you see it or read it or hear it, you notice reading or watching or listening to your own stuff that you just it changed the way that you not only view art but you create it. And I definitely say that out of everything he's made, this particular movie in terms of how I structure movies, he and her sisters did a lot, but I think for me, Fanny and Alexander kind of impacted me in the same ways that Hannah and her sisters did, just a little bit more. But I think that this movie was the most transformative for me as a writer, as a viewer, reader, whatever, uh, because I see a little bit of it in everything that I create.
Yeah, I definitely see that. I guess how I always felt about this movie is where I think like of Hannah and Annie Hall and Manhattan is like tens. I've always felt like this is that 9.5 film that's right below them.
Hmm.
That's always kind of been the context. I've even though like it's more impressive in a lot of ways, it's so not a Woody Allen movie for so much of it that it's hard to cross that line for me and be like, oh, this is better than
There is a
Manhattan.
culture shock.
you know,
because
it's
like
hard for me to be
the
like, "This is better than Manhattan." I just can't cross that line. I'm
yeah,
like, "Well, Diane Keaton's not in this movie."
that does hurt it.
Like, yeah. Like, if she was the sister wife or something, you know, if she was
That'd
just
be
in
fun.
if she was in there somewhere. But yeah, the lack of the Diane Keaton factor really kind of affects this for me, because I feel like Manhattan's his ultimate movie where it has the art house stuff. I think it's his most
Yeah.
I think the ending of that movie is his most complex in a lot of ways of just like how do you interpret it?
I think it's really shitty to say, but the opening of Manhattan might be the best thing he's ever filmed.
It's his
Where it's
best
just
looking movie.
it's pure cinema.
Yeah, that's his best looking movie without question is
Mhm.
Manhattan. Well, with Manhattan too, just the fact he doesn't like it, I just think there's so much to that movie. And Hannah and Her
Yeah.
Sisters, I just think is a funnier film than this. I think it's more impressive because he's balancing like six main characters and not just two storylines being paralleled. He's paralleling
It has
several.
Michael Caine.
That's the thing. Michael Caine's performance. I do think
I
that's
almost said Howard Stern, Daniel Stern.
yeah. Well, just Max von Sydow, Barbara Hershey. I
Yeah.
mean, it's insane. I mean, it's just like jam packed, and it's got these wonderful sequences that feel like they're out of a novel. You know, when she goes to visit her parents, Mia Farrow, and the dad's playing the piano, and he's like, "Remember this song?" And then the pictures, and then she comes in with this voice. The way he just inserts these voiceovers in and out, it's very Goodfellas or Casino.
Real quick with Hannah, I wanted to bring this up the whole video. I kept putting it off, but Hannah and this, I think, are great November movies. I think Woody Allen's very underrated as a fall director, which is funny because When Harry Met Sally is considered one of the great non-horror October movies to watch. But these always get overlooked. But I think that these are both of those two completely capture the fall in a way that's counterintuitive. It's not what you would expect from a fall time movie, but they're total fall classics.
So there's a conversation that Martin Landau character is having with the rabbi character about his decision. He's kind of revealing more to this guy. And the Sam Waterston character brings up, by the way, Sam Waterston really great in this movie. He's in a few Woody Allen
Yeah.
movies, but really kind of the underrated performance, I think, that people forget about. Martin Landau says at one point about God, I thought this was the most powerful line of the movie. This really hit me. God is a luxury I can't afford. Pretty heavy. That's that Woody Allen stuff. There's lines in here. There's hilarious lines
Yeah.
like the last time I was inside of a woman was when I was visited the Statue of Liberty. Or when she's like, he wants to
Mhm.
produce something. I'm like, yeah, your first child. But then there's these profound lines, you know, if necessary, I will always choose God over truth. God is a luxury I can't afford. There's these just
Yeah.
amazing the conversation because he does these almost vaudevillian fantasy scenes and they're prominent in Annie Hall and his works. But the Landau sequence when he views the family having the dinner table talk, I mean, that's like great theater. I mean, to me, that's like Shakespeare or
Yeah.
Chekhov, or I mean, it's one of the
Well,
ultimate great. I guess it goes back to Greek sort of plays with people sitting around tables and talking a lot of stuff. But
I wonder a lot about this with modern art and how it might be fucked in some ways with the law of diminishing returns, where so the classic filmmakers grew up on literature. Like Woody, we were talking about Russian literature and that influence on him, plays, Shakespeare's, the Greeks, all that. But modern filmmakers grew up on other movies, and movies aren't necessarily inherently worse than those things. A good movie's better than a bad book.
Quentin
But a
Tarantino.
lot of these, yeah, exactly. But a lot of these modern filmmakers grew up on like the Goonies in the 80s, and they don't see anything older than the 80s. And there's a lot of great movies made since the 80s, but when you look at this film, and it has it's such richness to it, I think, and that's something a lot of modern movies lack, is that they're very cheap. They're very surface level, and I do wonder if that multimedia influence isn't strong enough with modern filmmakers. Where like when you watch a movie, you're immediately like, oh, they're doing Indiana Jones here. Oh, they're doing Terminator. Oh, they're doing this. It never has that cultural richness or diversity that Woody Allen or so many of those other great filmmakers had.
I think the filmmakers today lack a worldview. I think they don't have a worldview like
Yeah.
Rossellini did, or or Truffaut, or Romer. The Kino list. If you want to go down that list,
Is that including Black Panther? Because when Scorsese said something about modern movies, they immediately were like, "Oh, so you're saying Black Panther isn't good?"
Yeah. Fassbender. Well, these directors back in the day, I mean, these are the kind of films that Woody Allen liked, and generally, I think they're the most
Yeah,
powerful works. It's somebody that has a cultural view, a worldview. It's deeply integrated into the film. They clearly got that worldview from reading a lot of books, from seeing a lot of plays. It's not from a visual corporate media sort of perspective. It's from all sorts of different perspectives, be it studying painting, studying history. It's all sorts of things. And that worldview is what shapes you to tell creative stories with interesting characters and a narrative. That's what makes a film feel personal and powerful. Woody Allen clearly has opinions and worldviews that he formed because he's not a young man when he's on this 80s run. I think his 80s run, which we haven't talked about, I think might be the best run any
yeah.
director's ever had in American cinema, like from 80 to 89. Just a few of the things here. I think I know all of them, but off the top of my head, it's like Stardust Memories, Zelig, Broadway Danny Rose, Purple Rose of Cairo, September, Another Woman, I think comes out in that decade. Uh, he makes Hannah and Her Sisters, he makes Radio Days, he makes this movie, all within 10 years. And 5 of those movies I'd say are like absolute classics. I mean, Broadway Danny Rose, Hannah,
Yeah.
this, Purple Rose of Cairo, and Radio Days are all like,
I think Another Woman is criminally underrated.
I agree. Well,
I get why it's not a total classic, but I think it's among like the cream of his crop for sure.
Well, a lot of the Polanski comes out in this era of Woody Allen with those kinds of
Yeah,
films. Even in this film, there's some Polanski for sure. I would think Match Point just feels like a Polanski movie.
it does.
In a big, if you told me he directed it, I would totally
The
think,
European influence
yeah,
just makes it seem even more Polanski.
100%. So just the run he went on here in the 80s. So the next thing I have, which we sort of covered before, because I want to get into the ending now. Cliff's a bad dude. He's trying to get with another woman while married, and he thinks he's a better man than everyone else. He shows himself as insecure throughout. So you talked about earlier how now when you watch it, you see he's simping and he hints at things. There's a few little things I picked up on, which I'm assuming you did as well. When he keeps talking to Mia Farrow as he's trying to seduce her, do you want some champagne? She says, I can never turn down champagne, especially champagne and caviar. Woody doesn't have any caviar. Later on in the movie, she ends up with the Alan Alda character. They're at a party, and he says how he followed her to London
Yeah.
and kept trying to woo her, and he says, I think it was the caviar.
Hmm.
So that right there kind of hints at something. And then what he brings up to her is it's somebody else. Don't tell me it's Lester. When he says
Well,
this,
also, I'm sorry
Cliff.
to cut you
No,
off,
go
but
ahead. Go ahead.
caviar is also a stereotypical rich person food.
Yes.
Cliff not having the caviar, Alan Alda having the caviar, therefore he gets the woman.
And he didn't, he
I
didn't,
do think that's intentional.
I agree. And he didn't buy the champagne. The champagne Woody Allen has was given to him because he won something at like a festival.
Yeah,
So he can't even buy the bottle of champagne. But we kind of get to know her character a little bit here, and I don't know if it's meant to be perceived as a negative. A lot of film critics at the time seemed to have taken it as like she's bad for taking the other guy, but I actually think it's way more nuanced than that, and I think critics missed it at the time.
yeah,
But he says to her, "Is it somebody else? Don't tell me it's Lester." That really caught me. Cliff knows what is going on and denying it like all men do. She tells him she's going away for 3 months to London. So there's a lot of moments where she talks about, oh, he wants to produce this thing with me. Oh, I'm going to go meet him at a hotel. Let's watch this movie first. And he knows what's going on. He feels it instinctually, like we all do. When that girl that
yeah,
you don't, either when you're getting cheated on or when that girl you project this relationship on that you don't have, like somebody else. But he's in this huge denial sort of phase. He
yeah,
he seems to believe that he's going to win her over, that they have this amazing relationship. And even when she comes back from London, they're going to reconnect and it'll be okay. He kisses her at one point. Later on, it talks about how much he loves her marriage. She says, don't confuse me. I've been in those situations. It was very
yeah,
oddly relatable where she's almost saying by doing this, it's almost an act of kindness when she does these things. So let's get into the ending. There's a he goes to a movie screening. It might even be Citizen Kane. I don't know what movie it is. They're doing the papers at the
yeah.
press. And then it says 4 months, and then he uses kind of this 19. It's a very creative transition. He uses this old school 40s transition to establish 4 months later. So we start with a party with the Martin Landau character giving a speech, and then we end at the wedding of the Sam Waterston's character's daughter. So this is where everything coalesces. So after they kill the Angelica Houston character, he actually goes over to the house to collect things, and like there's a moment that he almost doesn't leave when he shuts the door, like he's almost going to go back, but then he decides to walk out. That's the moment that I think he accepts what he's done. Uh but the Woody Allen character, there's a shot, he's at the party with his wife. She says, "Okay, this is the last event we have to go together. Just be cool." He turns his head, looks over. Mia Farrow's with the Alan Alda character, and just the look on Woody Allen's face
Oh yeah.
as he walks over in
It's
real life.
almost like, my favorite shot in The Godfather Part 2, and it's incredibly underrated, shocking that you can't just Google image it, is the moment when whenever Michael finds out that Fredo's the one that betrays him, and it's like a shot of like a bunch of men standing, and Michael puts his hand, or he puts his head in his hand, and the level like gut wrenching that scene conveys, it's kind of similar, the look on Woody's face when he sees them.
I will say it didn't hit me as hard as it used to, but the first time, I mean
Yeah,
this kicks you in the nuts. It's like real life. It's just too brutal.
exactly.
It's it because even in the context that Woody is flawed and he made these mistakes and all that, that doesn't make his pain not warranted or like what
One
he's
of the best
feeling.
people's advice I'd ever heard was that your emotions are always valid. Even if you're wrong, your emotions are still valid.
Exactly. So even if I see now that it's flawed and realistic, just like you do when you look back on things that you've done, it's still not it's still hard not to just really relate to, women end up with a guy that's got more going on than you, and all of these virtues
Yeah,
that you think you have don't mean anything ultimately. She's going to go with the more attractive guy, she's going to go with the richer guy. And I think that's
yeah.
true. I don't think it's an exaggeration. I don't think that's a
Hmm.
cynical take. It makes sense. Why
No,
wouldn't
it's not
they?
even immoral take, because that's the
Wh-
thing too, is that all of Woody's virtues that he holds or whatever are really just thoughts that he has, and that's like his defense, like, oh, I have better thoughts than this person. But when you think about like mating in cultural, like marriage and finding a partner, it's about security. Can they provide? Are they stable? Are they providing, and not just financially but emotionally, which Cliff is shown to do through his actions, like the caviar, like giving Cliff a job, and his words, the words of others explaining him. Whereas, or I'm sorry, I might say Cliff, I'm an Alan Alda's
I
character.
yeah.
Cliff, on the other hand, is shown to be none of those things the
Well,
entire time.
he's not a
He's
man, I would
undesirable.
say. I would say he
Yeah, he's a
lacks
shrimp.
he doesn't exude masculinity, doesn't exude confidence, he doesn't exude any success. She wants to make it further in her career. This guy's going to make it further in the career. He thinks that he's only interested in her for sex, but I think there's a high possibility that the Alan Alda character actually wants to work with her, and that's part of the attraction
Yeah,
because he can get attractive women. They established that he could get women. He likes her beyond the fact that she's Mia Farrow in the 80s, but that she's
yeah.
also a successful, smart, strong woman, and that they can be a power couple. And but the thing that is crazy about this, Woody Allen makes a lot of movies where he doesn't end up with the girl at the end. In Annie Hall, they break up. Hannah and her sisters,
Hmm.
it's a post divorce. He's done,
Manhattan.
yeah, he does this a lot, but he usually has the girl. I mean, what I think he does, it's a trick that he does in his movies you pick up on. He basically hides a lot of the atheist nihilistic messaging by making his characters he plays in his movies into schlubs. So the fact he gets to play
Hmm.
the comedic schlub that fails, and that's what the center is, makes you not focus so much on the real stuff that he's doing with the rest of his movies, if that makes sense. So he's like, okay, I got to make
Hmm.
myself the loser, but really what I'm saying is life is meaningless, but I'm
Like
covering
a
that
lot
up
of
with that.
like a lot of comedians, Woody Allen's very influenced, especially as a kid, by magicians. And a big thing with magicians is that it's all about distraction. If I move this hand over here, you're not realizing what I'm doing with my right hand, and that's where I'm putting the card in my sleeve. And that's very similar to what he does narratively.
Well, I think the secret weapon of this movie and all Woody Allen movies is structure. I think if you
Hmm.
asked him this question, what matters more in a story? Is it the content of the story or the structure of the story? I think he would say structure. I don't think he would say content because I think for him, content's easy. I think it's easy for him to write funny one-liners. I think he's a master
Yeah.
at it. He might be the best who's ever done it, to be quite honest.
I think his career as a joke writer just prepped him for that, where he could just come up with 100 brilliant jokes a day.
Yeah, he put the hours in, the 10,000 hours back in his writing
Yeah.
days. And all of his contemporaries at that time, I think he's just far and away better than them in that too, like the Mel Brooks of the
Yeah.
world and stuff. So I don't think it's that hard for him, and I think he's so well read. I think he knows how to write like interesting, fascinating characters and stuff. I think the thing, and I've heard him talk about this, that's difficult is when he has to walk around and figure out how to put it all together. How, because this is the thing that's underrated
Yeah.
about his movies, because he makes it seem seamless. People don't realize from a writing standpoint, and this is true of the Coen brothers with something like Fargo, how difficult it is to have those things logically play off of each other and make sense. That's the stuff that's hard to figure out
Yeah.
when you're writing a book, a screenplay, anything. You could have a bunch of great ideas and a bunch of great material, but let's say you have 10 ideas. How do you make those 10 ideas connect? And he says that that's what he spends a lot of time walking around New York trying to figure out, like, how does this character meet this character? How does this storyline reflect this storyline? And you really don't notice it with all of his movies, but really starting with Annie Hall and beyond that, all of his movies have insanely complex narrative structures, literary
Yeah. Well, I think
narrative
Annie
structure.
Hall, being that it had like 3 hours of footage and was edited into something coherent, is really a testament to that.
Well, I think his movies are made in the editing more than we think about them. I think a lot of people think
Yeah.
that he has these brilliant screenplays, and then I think people think he reshot the first act of this movie.
Hmm.
They finished the
They
film.
cut a ton.
He was cutting the movie, and then they went and redid the like opening act of the movie, and he does this commonly with his budget. So I think what happens a lot of the
Yeah.
time, and this is why I think Woody Allen films are good mostly, I think he writes a script. I think he goes and shoots very quickly, and then I think because of his narrative understanding from being so well read, and I think this is really the secret weapon to Woody Allen. I really do. I think he sits in the editing room, and that's when he starts to make that magic trick happen. And then when he sees a
Yeah.
mistake, he corrects it. Like Hannah and Her Sisters had a different ending originally. It was more tragic, and he said it didn't work, so then he reshot it. I think when he's in that editing room, I think it's when he finds those structures. I think it's when he puts it together. I think so when he shapes it into these 90-minute movies. And I think that's why his movies work so well. I think he's a master. It's hard to think of his movies that way because they don't seem very technical. They're not like big ever. Uh,
Yeah.
his post production work is very excellent, and I'd like to ask you about that too. I think the difference between the content of a subject and the way you structure it in telling a story, especially in a screenplay and a movie. And I think this movie reflects that in a lot of ways.
Yeah, well, going back to what you said about editing, I've always seen it's a weird comparison, but I've always seen this Annie Hall as being like his Fire Walk with Me or his Lost Highway, where it's just a collection of stuff that I think probably Fire Walk with Me is a better comparison, but I think it's a much worse movie. Um, is that it's like a collection of all these different scenes and having to edit it together somehow to make it coherent. And similarly, how I think that Lynch built the rest of his career off that experience, it seemed very difficult and transformative for him. Where really, the rest of his career was just remaking Firewalk with Me one way or another. Whereas it's the bisected narrative of Lost Highway or Mulholland Drive and Twin Peaks: The Return being very dreamlike, that kind of Wizard of Oz retelling type shit. Um, I think similarly, Annie Hall was transformative for Woody Allen in how he maybe that's when he learned to edit or learned how powerful of a tool that it is. Because yeah, this movie a lot was changed post production, like you said. September was reshot, I think 3 times. It was either shot 3 times or reshot 3 times with like entirely different casts because of scheduling. But his movies are so cheap to make, and they usually make profit, so he could get away with it and still uh make his money back, so the studio didn't give a shit. But what I think is fascinating with these movies is they're very humble, and people don't talk about that, where they'll say he makes the same movie every time, or they all look the same, or something, which I just think is objectively false most of the time. I mean, he has recurring themes, like this is very similar to Match Point. You can find that. But I'm sorry, he made 50 movies and he repeated himself sometimes. Read two Edgar Allan Poe stories, and he's going to use the same simile or like similar
Yeah.
themes. Everybody does it. There's just people who don't create anything that act like they're above it. But if they did make anything, it'd be totally superior to anything ever made. But in terms of content versus structure, I think that you need structure obviously to make a narrative, to make a work of art. But I'm fascinated by the idea of just having a formless piece of content. I guess something like maybe Mr. Show or Tim and Eric could even fall into that kind of postmodern comedy. It's got $1 Million Extreme maybe, but even those do have a structure. They're just very irreverent, kind of poking fun at the idea. Where it's funny, they even have a structure. Um, but I guess in terms of Woody Allen, I would say that he's a structuralist, but I do think the content matters more. Like, what is the difference between this and Melinda Melinda? The content, because the concept of Melinda Melinda is really interesting, but the writing isn't nearly as good. The directing isn't nearly as good. So it's a marriage. I think they both hold up their end.
But like you said, I think what I want to take away from this that I haven't heard comment a lot, I do think he's a structuralist first.
Yeah.
I think that
But
is
even his
this.
bad movies have solid form, I think.
I think that's a secret weapon of Woody Allen, is his understanding of narrative structures.
Yeah.
I think he's like a genius at it. You know what I mean? Like, I think it's like if he
Yeah.
wrote novels, I think he wouldn't have an issue with it in the same sense. I think he knows how to structure stories. So let's get to the end here. Let's wrap it up. Woody and the Martin Landau character end up sharing a drink together and have a conversation where Martin Landau. I almost felt a little bit this was too on the nose because it gets a little too meta for my taste, where he's like pitching a movie and they're kind of talking about
Yeah.
the movie. It's like Woody realized what he had, so he kind of tries to really lay it on thick at the end a little bit too much. So Martin Landau
Yeah.
basically pitches the movie, which is what happens to him. And then Woody kind of counters him about that, about this is what you can't do in a movie. And then Martin Landau says, well, yeah, but this is real life. This is a movie, even though he started the premise. Then Alan Alda brings up with the sister, finding out when he goes to ask her, he's like, am I a phony? Am I full of shit? Your brother hates, even your husband hates me. And, she's like, hey, I met someone. We're ending. And then he hugs her, and they actually feel like good people. And I think they are
Yeah.
rewarded. So I don't think the message of virtue gets punished. I think they're actually good people, and I think for the most part, excluding maybe the Angelica Houston character, I think everybody kind of fairly gets the outcome that they
Yeah.
deserve in a
Well,
lot of
Alvy's
ways.
just too blinded by ego and insecurity to see that he's not a good person.
Alvy.
Al shit.
They're all, yeah, Cliff.
Cliff.
Yeah, Cliff.
Yeah.
I love that his name's
Um,
Clifford.
with Alan Alda and
I
then
know.
Alvy keep throwing me
I've
off.
gotten brothers and
But
husbands and sisters mixed up like 20 times with this too. I'm like, I can't keep track. I'm like,
this
wait,
is
who's the brother of the
yeah,
sister of the husband?
yeah, the pratfalls of like recording late at night. But no, I think that I almost said Chuck. Cliff is too blinded by his own arrogance to see that he's immoral. And his framework is that he's not as bad as a murderer. Just like if you do something bad or someone doesn't like you, like, well, I'm not a murderer, I'm not a rapist. It's like, well, that's not good enough. You still have to be a good person that's rewarding for other people to be around, that's caring and
That
does
makes me
their
think about
job.
a Chris Rock bit where he talks about like black dudes bragging about things they do, like,
Oh yeah,
I take care of my family. I never been to jail. And he's like, you're supposed to.
exactly.
Like that's not the standard to base it off of. Um, I think we
What's
cut.
interesting too.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say with the final scene with those characters connecting. What's funny is that it frames it in a way where it makes you, the audience, ask, "Did this happen to Woody Allen? Did someone come up to him at a party, pitch this movie, and then he made it?" which I don't think happened. But that's funny. It plants that seed of an idea in the audience's head.
I thought the exact same thing. Where what I liked about that scene is it did feel like it's something that actually happened. I thought the exact same way.
And making that the last scene in the movie really makes it plausible.
Yeah, it feels like he was at a party, heard that, and then it pondered in his head for a long time about, what if somebody did do that and they didn't feel guilt about it afterwards? Because that's really what the speech is. That's the resolution of the
Yeah.
film is Martin Landau saying, well, time passes. And it's interesting, Alan Alda
Well,
saying
that ties in.
comedy is
Yeah.
tragedy plus time, and then Martin Landau is saying time has passed and I don't feel the guilt anymore. So I guess those things actually coalesce. Alan Alda's
And what's
right.
also funny, subversion too, is what is the opposite of comedy,
Yeah, tragedy.
dramatically speaking. So you watch the Woody Allen part expecting to be a comedy, and you watch the Alan Alda part, or the Alan Alda, the Martin
We
Landau
just want to
part.
talk about Alan Alda. We're
Yeah.
focusing on the Chad. We're drawn to
we
him.
when you called me, I was in a hotel with Alan Alda.
Yeah. Is, are you with Alan Alda? No, no, no. I hear in the back, if it bends.
Are you eating curry?
Yeah.
It sounds like you're eating curry, but
It sounds like
um
he's feeding you caviar and champagne in a bathtub right now.
you expect the Landau part to be the tragedy, but actually, speaking dramatically, Landau's part is a comedy in the sense that they always say with Shakespeare, the comedies end in weddings and the tragedies end in funerals, but there's no funeral at the end. But Woody Allen's plot line is the tragedy,
Totally. That's exactly
and
it.
that's what makes it so complex.
The use of irony
Yeah,
in this movie. That's exactly right. It sets you up in two dramatic structures with drastic tones, and then it flips them at the very end. It brings them together and finds different resolution for. But yeah, for the Woody Allen storyline, you just feel sad and depressed at the end. He's just sitting there drinking alone at a bar. She says the line that's the most cutting thing a woman can say to you is that, I hope we can be friends, or I really care about
yeah,
you. If you're a young guy and a woman ever says that to you, you're never gonna see her again. That's the last
yeah.
conversation you're ever gonna have. She doesn't want to be friends with you. She doesn't mean that, and she
My honest advice to younger guys is don't even make it an option. Like if you're interested in that way, like you don't want to be your friend, you know it's always going to be in the back of your head. Well, maybe she'll eventually see if I'm a good enough friend. And if you're interested in that way, it's just not worth it. It's just a charade. Why lie to her? Why lie to yourself? Why waste both your time?
well, also she knows what's going on.
Yeah,
She knows what you want. That's kind of my issue with that a lot, though, is when we like talk about the guy's negative part, we ignore the fact that women will egg it on for a long time for the attention. I mean, they do. They like
well, a
that
big thing
you're
for me is
because
like,
they're not stupid. They know what you're after.
yeah,
It's not, you're not just like being her best friend because you think she's so interesting all the time.
yeah. My counterpoint though would be that I don't know how many girls are watching cinema chats for dating
That's
advice.
true.
To be fair, so I think it's more appropriate to address the men.
That's true. No, but just in defense of men, like I would say the
Yeah,
negative, because you deal with this stuff in like work dynamics where it's like, oh, that eventually the girl's like, oh, this guy too far. It's like, yeah, but you were flirting for like 2 months. And then
exactly.
all of a sudden, somebody says something, and then now it's I'm the bad guy, or you're the
But there's
bad
always those
guy.
psychic messages where it's like, "Oh,
Yeah.
this is good, this is good, this is good. You initiated this." But now there's a psychic message that I didn't pick up apparently, that all of a sudden it's not cool, but it wasn't communicated.
But I don't think many movies handle that well. I think this movie does it brilliant. There's miscommunication between characters. There's misunderstanding between people. We get a sense of the Martin Landau family life, and it's so weird that they're so distant from what's going on. The wife's even kind of ignoring these random phone calls he's getting. I think the scene where Angelica Houston
Yeah.
calls and says, I'm at a gas station down the road, and if you don't come meet me, I'm showing up, is like horrifying.
It is. It's a weird comparison. I don't know why I always think about it, but I always think about the Tide segment in Creepshow.
Hmm.
I can't explain. It's Martin Landau. as something, and I know he's not in that segment, but he kind of looks like Leslie Nielsen in that old guy with the white hair way. Something about this movie reminds me so much of what is it? It's not they're creeping up on you, whatever that segment is, where
Yeah,
he drowns them by burying them under their neck in sand.
Ted
So
Danson. He drowns Ted
yeah,
Danson. Yeah, makes him dig his own grave and then
maybe it's a
drowns.
mix of like Leslie Nielsen, the comedian, being that bad guy. I don't know, some vibe way.
Yeah, I agree.
I just
Yeah.
feel a connection.
Well, it's an '80s thriller sequence that's got a rich
Yeah.
guy. It's kind of got a similar visual aesthetic and stuff like that. I mean, it's honestly, it doesn't feel like a Romero directed that. It's very,
No, not at all.
it's insane.
Well, this is another thing, but I think Creepshow is probably Romero's best direction. I
Oh,
could
I
say Night of the
agree.
Living Dead, but I'd honestly probably say Creepshow is more impressive to me.
Technically, yes. There's no question. That's his
Yeah,
most accomplished film. All right, man. We kicked off November. That's Crimes and Misdemeanors. Woody Allen's acidic comedy masterstroke. It wrapped up his '80s career. It's right before all the Mia stuff explodes in the early '90s,
yep.
and his whole career is affected. And even his comeback later, which now he's canceled.
You know what
Hopefully.
would be a really great headline for that time though? When the controversy strikes, Mamma Mia, because
What?
she's the mother of the whole thing's just
Mamma Mia, and then in the new one, Mamma Mia, here we go again. Uh, Woody Allen became a very complicated figure. I think a lot of
yeah,
people in the industry and just in general life, I mean, I get all the time, they think he's a pedophile. I mean, it's that Michael
yeah,
Jackson thing with him. He's thought of as a pedophile by a lot of people. It's not like a small
yeah,
group of people. He's thought of as a guy who married his daughter. I hear that common
yep,
all the time, even though she wasn't his daughter, but you hear it.
nope,
Um, he's pretty much been ostracized from the industry, even though he had this huge career resurgence where like Midnight in Paris was his biggest movie, Match Point was
yep.
big, Blue Jasmine was big, Vicky Cristina Barcelona, all these big movies. He was doing stuff with Amazon, which was stuff that I don't think was very good. That show he was doing
No,
on
it's actually a
it.
blessing in
Yeah,
disguise.
like I wish somebody would cancel him, Jesus.
Crisis in Six Scenes was like a total mixed bag.
Yeah, but you know, he kind of got, I mean, he won another Oscar. Midnight in Paris, he won Best Screenplay, his fourth Oscar, and he was
Yeah,
like 78 or something. Uh Now he wrote a book. I mean, that deserves its own podcast talking about the Mia Farrow thing, but I just want to bring it up because Husbands and Wives is clearly about things, Match Point. Uh he's a morally complicated person in real life, and his movies deal with those things, but usually they lean on the edge of a comedic, whimsical, uh, just just a life, just life reflection or life affirming or excite. Radio Days is such a powerful, beautiful film. Or Purple Rose of Cairo is tragic, but it's also like got this magical movie thing about it. This film really, just it's as complicated as what I think the duality of Woody Allen's best reflected. I think he's Clifford, and I also think he's the Martin Landau character.
I think this movie's about as deep and complex as American cinema gets. And I
I
don't just mean mainstream American cinema. I think like indie, your A24s, your classics, whatever. I would say this is probably the centerpiece.
I agree. I think in the way most American films, because we have to make that distinction, because European films do this
Yeah.
a lot, but most American films won't explore uh, the grayness of morality, or it won't just take a dark. A perfect example. There's the movie, even though the same guy made it, The Vanishing, and the original foreign film
Oh yeah.
has a very
Spore loose.
has a very dark ending. I mean, it's one of the
Yeah.
darkest endings ever in a movie. It gets set up at the, I won't spoil, but something gets set up at the beginning with a lighter and a light in a dream, and then the movie ends with the guy looking at a light, and he's in a pretty bad situation. I'll put it
Yeah.
that way. And then the same director remade that movie, and in the American version he made, it ends more like a Hollywood movie. And even beyond that, Denis Villeneuve's Prisoners. which I think is a film that had some complexity for a Hollywood thriller, ends in a
Yeah.
more conventional way where almost like it doesn't end in the tragic way. Now, we do have movies that, David Fincher made Seven. I think that movie has a lot of balls for an American
Yeah.
movie. It does go to that dark place, but it's not common. We don't get it a lot in movies. So Crimes and Misdemeanors is really special that Woody had enough clout at the time, I think mostly from the success of Hannah and Her Sisters and where he was kind of right at the time, that he was able to make this movie, which I don't think he
This is
was.
his Life of Pablo.
Yeah, totally. It is his T-Lop. I agree. And I also think he built up to this. I think he was skilled enough at the time that he was, where maybe,
Yeah.
even though I love Interiors, I think he didn't quite do the thing he was trying to do. I don't think he quite reached that high. I think he was
Yeah.
really trying to make like a Bergman film. Here, I mean, this is an accomplishment worthy of like a Scenes from a Marriage or Wild Strawberries or something like that. This is
Exactly.
this
I
is
think
one of the
Interiors
great
is like
films.
I think Interiors like high B tier, Alan,
Totally. B
but this
plus.
is just A plus. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, this was a real achievement. I think it's probably the best film of well, maybe Do the Right Thing, but it's right there as like the best film of 1989. It's because it's hard to not like, I want to, because all the things we're talking about, I think a lot of these complexities do apply to Do the Right Thing. And that's certainly cinematically a more powerful experience, at least like viscerally, it's engaging.
Mhm.
Even the beginning when Rosie Perez is dancing to fight the power, that's just an immediately like impactful thing. But yeah, I love this movie. I think it's fantastic. The rewatch was very illuminating. Like I saw new things that I'd never seen before, and I thought this movie would mess me up because that's what I'd done in the past. I always just felt my heart ripped out and all that
The older I
stuff.
get, the more it's just cathartic, honestly.
Yeah,
Like the cliff stuff, like we talked, like the ending, as I get older and see the complexity of it more, it's more just logical. It's almost life affirming in a weird way where it's like, of
yeah.
course this is what happened. And you just feel a little bit less alone and you also see his faults and that makes you want to work on your own.
Well, that life is what it is. It's not what you want it to be.
Yeah, exactly. Like, and that's a big lesson that I took from the movie is that it's so funny when you think about like a girl you're interested in, you're like, but I like her so much. Nobody else will like her as much as me. It's like that's just a feeling. That
Yeah,
doesn't mean anything. There's no value to that.
yeah. I agree. All right, man. Thank you for doing this one with me.
Yep.
We're in November. We're gonna be doing more. It's funny, the movies we're gonna do this month, we weren't alive for when any of them came out. We're gonna talk about them like we were, because we're weird
Yep.
guys. Like especially a couple of the movies, like one we're gonna talk about near the end of the month. I think is a pretty iconic movie. But the ones we're gonna fit in here is like a boomer porn movie, and I'm like, why are we talking about this? And yet it's one of my favorite movies. So this is the direction of the podcast. It's like, okay, we did the Halloween month. Now we're going a totally different direction. We're going to talk about these more adult comedies that are kind of about people that are older and dealing with struggles and dealing with
Yeah.
kind of their perceptions of themselves versus like the real world and what they're dealing with. And they're all fascinating when it comes to like sexuality and male ego and relationships and so on and like that. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know why more people don't do video essays or stuff about Woody Allen. I think that's the biggest takeaway I have from this. I'm glad we did this. I've only made like one Woody Allen video. I think,
I'd recommend Rick Worley's series to
yeah,
people listening because he has the most comprehensive takedown of the allegations. And
yeah,
it's just whether you agree or disagree with everything he says, I mean, that's
yeah,
for you to decide. But it's very impressive for a YouTuber the way he constructs. It's like 10 hours or something
yeah,
outrageous.
yeah. I would just say Woody Allen's is a national treasure. He's one of the great filmmakers, and I don't know who the man really is. But I think his art is so valid. I'm not going to ignore it. And I'm not going to not talk about it, and I'm not going to not be a fan of him because of what people say he did or did not do.
I'm not going to apologize for being a fan of him. Actually, literally, the last girl that I had over, I had my
The
books,
last
and I have
girl
my
that I had over,
yeah, um,
like it's
and the last one
common.
I will have over probably. Um, But I had on my book stand Woody Allen's book, Zero Gravity, was there. And she was like looking. I was like, I said, listen, I'm a huge Woody Allen fan. If you're not cool with it, you can leave. I get it, but I'll die on that hill.
Yeah. Yeah, I hope we do. I hope we the idea is we're going to kind of rotate his movies in throughout the podcast as we go. We just, they'll be randomly, we'll just be like, hey, let's talk about this Woody Allen movie. But I thought we should start
Yep,
with this one because once you get this one out of the way, I think a lot of the other ones are going to be easier
definitely.
to get down. It's like I don't want to build up to crimes and
Yeah.
misdemeanors. But hey,
Well,
if
so
you
speaking of other movies, one thing I wanted to bring up, because we keep talking about Alan Alda, is and everyone says I love you. Alan Alda and Woody also share scenes in that. They're like buddies, and Alan Alda is married to Woody's ex-wife in that one. And it's just a funny to see two actors do totally different dynamics.
Mhm.
And with Woody being the director, choosing Alan for those different dynamics, I think it's just very rewarding, even though they're very different movies, to see that after seeing this and getting that little Easter egg for fans.
But yeah, if you haven't seen this movie, it is actually on YouTube. It's not in great quality, but I don't really think you need to see this movie in great quality to get something out of it. But I'm sure you can like find it on Amazon or something. And like he said, they're releasing
Hmm.
Blu-rays of it here soon. So yeah, if you haven't seen it, I'd say check it out. And I would recommend doing a double feature of this and Hannah and Her Sisters.
If you haven't seen this movie, it's a crime and a misdemeanor.
All right, subscribe and all that shit. Thanks for watching.